Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the Freight Fraud Prevention Hub Q2 webinar. We're just going to wait a minute and allow folks an opportunity to join. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is our Q2 webinar for Freight Fraud Prevention Hub. And appreciate everybody that has joined us. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we do have questions that we'll be going through, but we also will be going through the freight fraud, some real-time freight fraud cases, talk about some of the things that we're doing at NMFTA. But throughout, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop a question in, and we will ask questions with both myself, Marley, and Shannon. And so today's agenda, we'll do a welcome. We'll go through why this matters. Again, we'll do some overviews, and then and also really want to talk Q&A. That's what makes these webinars really good, is when they're interactive. All right, on the next slide. So, by way of introductions, I'll let everybody introduce themselves. So, Marley, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Marley Hall. I'm Director of Communications and Marketing here at NMFTA. I've been here 3.5 years. 4 years will be in August, and I oversee all strategic communications, public relations, nominate NMFTA, our products and services for awards. So I wear a few different hats. And also my background, I've been with Truckload Carriers Association, so TCA in the industry. I was with them for about 10 years. And then my background really was PR and journalism with a degree from West Virginia University. So I'm happy to be here today. And I will now toss it over to Shannon.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Shannon Cox, and I'm the Director of Fraud Operation and Analytics at Landstar. I've only been with Landstar 2.5 years, but I have been in the fraud industry for over 20. I have a background in retail fraud and just in the oil industry. So I come with a lot of different fraud experience and am able to put it together and hopefully help this industry where we can work together and combat some of this fraud.
Okay. And I am Joe Orr. I'm the COO, CTO at NMFTA. I've been with NMFTA now 2.5 years. I've spent the last 25 years in logistics from the IT perspective at various companies like Qualcomm. So have worked with a lot with the carriers, the brokers, on the issues that matter. So again, we appreciate everybody that's joining. All right, so Shannon, thanks for joining. You know, we really want to talk about why this webinar series matters. So we started this because we found that there's a lot of information all over the place, and really what we wanted to do is get the information all in one place. Have a common place where people can come and talk about best practices and how to secure the industry. This becomes a growing problem. And, you know, we were talking earlier, it's really taken off. So, you know, Marley, I'm going to throw a question at you. You know, how has this exceeded expectations as far as this webinar and just the feedback that we're getting?
Absolutely. So to date, we have had Joe and we conduct 15-minute quick introductory calls with partners, And we've had 32 of those since the end of February, whenever the hub launched. So pretty outstanding. The team and I were it's just an overwhelming response, honestly. I mean, it went past kind of the goal that we had set out for ourselves, but the 15-minute calls really are a chance for us to get to know potential partners, and they're very insightful. It really does show that freight fraud and cyber-enabled cargo theft, et cetera, is really more than just a stolen load. It can affect people's livelihoods, their jobs. So we've really heard a lot of stories. Some are really heart-wrenching. So this is a huge problem that hopefully this hub will help to combat.
Okay. All right. And next, we're going to talk about just in general freight fraud and some of the emerging trends. And so, with that being said, Marley, just so you know, we can't see the slide deck yet. Um, but just, Shannon, if I look at your background, it's not something that maybe it was typical in the freight industry to have someone with your skill set, especially the analytics piece of it. Why do you think it is so needed, and why is it so important now for a trucking company or a logistics company to have someone with your skill set on board?
Well, freight fraud used to be that you would go and hire someone, they just steal your load, right? Now it's so strategic. They have operations just like we have operations. They go to a building, they have their lunch, they have their screens, and their job is to steal our freight. So they have patterns, obviously. They work together, and it takes more than just, you know, being careful who you hire. It's all of these carriers that are fraudulent carriers are working together, and it's important to be able to look at that. And I think companies are realizing that, because I go to many conventions, and you would be surprised how many companies have instituted having a fraud department or a risk department. And that's what we do, is we try to combat the fraud that's happening, and we work together.
Okay, and let me expand on that. There's you say we have to work together. The bad actors we know are working together. Why do you think there's a hesitancy sometimes to work together? And the industry always works together great, but when it comes to freight fraud, we've kind of been slow to do that. Why do you think that may be the case?
I think it's because what we know. There's always been a process, right? For anything in the world. I mean, we're just following human nature. So you have your process, you follow your process, and then the freight moves on, and then the next person who handles that freight has their process. They're all secure processes, but there's that little crack between the two, and that's where we need to fill the gap. We need to make sure that the handoffs, we're communicating, making sure that the right handoff is happening. So it's not that anyone is necessarily afraid to work together. It's just we've never done it before. So I think that going forward, as we expand and do things like this, we get to know each other. We go, okay, shipper, I'm sending you this driver. And the shipper goes, yes, I see this driver is here. That's how we fill the gap. That gap of when that driver picks it up. So now that gap is filled. So the right driver has it. So at least that part is correct. And then it moves to the next step, and we communicate the driver would communicate directly
Hmm.
with the agent, and so forth. So it's not that anything is nefarious or we're afraid. It's just what we've always done.
Okay. And I mean, there's two sides of this, right? Some people are like, well, if we work together and we put information out there that helps each other, we're also aiding the bad actors. How do we find that fine line of helping each other, but yet keeping the information in and not letting the bad actors, because there could be, for example, a bad actor on this webinar.
Exactly. That is a fear. All of the conferences we go to, all the webinars we do, anyone can be listening, anyone can join, and that is a chance we take, which is why we have to be vague. We have to talk about things, and and expand more in person. So if
Right.
we were on here, we talk about overall. I talked about filling the cracks, right? So each person will fill them differently. You have different tech, you have different methods, but just knowing those cracks are there, we fill them. But hopefully, the bad actors aren't going to know like ABC Trucking's going to fill it one way and I'm going to fill it another.
Right. One of the biggest topics that always comes up on these calls is driver vetting. Um, in this industry, it seems like there's a 5,000 different ways to vet a driver. Some have proven successful, some not. What do you think the keys to success are without, to my previous question, going into the details, but at a high level, what do we have to do to improve this piece of it?
So this is layers. It's not no one thing. I mean, there's a lot of tech out there, and they're good. They're really good tech. I've done demos, even though we don't always use all of them. I've done demos with many companies, and they're all good in their own ways. Everyone does it differently. They scan IDs. Some of them do facial recognition. It just whichever tech that you decide, you need to also layer it with the human touch because no matter how much tech you have, the bad guys have more. They have unlimited funds, right? They're spending our money, not theirs. So they have everything. So tech wise, we're never going to beat them. We can get it up there, but we have to have that human touch. Go back to the 90s, pick up the phone, call whoever you're supposed to be working with, and make sure it's really them. That's really it. Is the layers. It's not just one thing.
We always hear a lot about the thefts. Obviously, that's what makes the news is the tequila got stolen, the energy drinks got stolen. Any success stories that you can share where, some of the layers that have been put in place within the industry, you've actually successfully seen it slow or stop it down?
So I can't give specific stories, but I can be general. Um,
Hmm.
I know with tech, obviously, you do the initial vetting, right? You do the initial vetting of the carrier. Then you hire the carrier, they pick it up, and then they hopefully do what you want them to do and deliver it. But if you do hire a bad guy by, they somehow either bought an MC number or they impersonated a carrier, if you have exception reporting rather than just having to look at your entire company, but you have some sort of tech that'll do exception reporting, you can catch it before it happens. So you have to be totally involved. It can't be just, you have your broker, and you hire your carrier. You have to keep following the load, make sure that you know that the right truck is within the pickup. So it's not just hiring the carrier and moving on. It's still a matter of collaboration and working together.
Okay. And one of the questions we've got in the Q&A is increased freight fraud data sharing between Canada and the US, and it's a great question, but that if they work together, it's seen more as a North American. I know we've talked a lot about people working together. What have you seen it cross the border into Canada and even down to Mexico, where it's not just a U.S. focus, but everybody working together?
I know when I go to seminars and conventions, we do talk about the crossing the borders. They definitely are moved now. Mexico is a whole nother story,
Hmm.
but that they've always had their different kind of. It's not so much strategic down there. We all know that's a place where the trucks just get robbed, right? They don't need to bother
Right.
with strategic. But into Canada, I feel like with discussions that we've had internally and in the industry, it just feels like it's starting to move that way. I think years ago it was here, just here, and now it's moving into Canada. So it's definitely crossing borders, and we just have to be diligent no matter where we're at.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I know from an NMFTA perspective, we don't look at just US. We also talk to folks within the government or within the industry in Canada. We've talked to Marley and I have talked to some insurance carriers because really it doesn't have a border. Whether it's being driven in the U.S., outside the U.S., it doesn't matter. This is a problem we want to tackle, and it has no borders. So we can in NMFTA we continue to work a lot with Canada also. So what is what do you think can this be prevented? I mean, what should the goal be? Do you think we can get this down to zero? I read somewhere where some of the folks are like, hey, we've got to eliminate this. Is this something where you think we can eliminate? I mean, what's your outlook on freight fraud? It seems very sometimes daunting.
I think if, as an industry, I feel like we're starting to work together. The conferences get bigger and bigger. Every time I go to one, it was like 200 people attending, then 300. This last one I just went to was 400. It really seems like the industry is starting to come together and want to build that net, right, where we can catch them. They're always going to be out there because they're making money, right? The bad guys make money. So they're going to be out there and they're going to keep trying. Obviously, if you get hit hard enough, you're going to miss one here and there. So are we going to completely eliminate it? Probably not. But if you make it hard enough for them, they'll move to somebody else, right? They might move to a different industry. We have to make it as hard for the bad guys as we can.
Okay. And what about, you talked about technology, you talked about tracking. What are some of the things that we could do within the industry as a logistics, as a carrier, as a shipper, with the technology and the tracking? Because we see where, the bad guys are like, ooh, I'm going to spoof my GPS. What are some of the things you think that we can do from a technical perspective to help combat this within the tracking area?
So this really would be great for the shippers. The shippers can put tracking devices within the cargo. And so, although as a broker, you would be tracking obviously by either ELD or whatever form that you use, there's companies out there that will put tracking on both the trailer and the tractor. So it just depends on who you use for your tech. But the biggest bang that you're going to get is if the shipper and customer help and put it in the cargo and bury it with multiple, because most of the bad guys, they go through and they'll get the ones that are obvious, but they don't dig through what's in there. They very seldom unwrap. When they repackage up your goods, it's going to be repackaged in the pallets that were there. They're not digging through it. So is if a shipper will put their secondary tracking in there, that's probably the big thing that the bad guys aren't looking for.
Okay. And one of the questions that just came in, and it's a great question. I know that it's one I've tried to work through in 15 of my 25 years is there's these companies that everybody wants, I'll call it, like an Amazon type experience where I can see how many stops away my package is. I know when it's going to be delivered. That's just as a consumer, that's something that's valuable. So there's middle party or third party firmware that will take these locations and put them out on the website, different websites for people. And we get why they do it, but is there a data security and a privacy issue there? And any thoughts on how to secure that? Because who knows who's looking at that? It could be a bad actor looking to see, okay, here comes a high value shipment, and they could be using this third party hardware or third party middleware.
So that is a little out of my expertise.
Okay.
I know that they do have companies out there that give you secure links, but I cannot speak to how secure they are. That's out of my purview.
Okay. And one of the things I would suggest is, you know, it's your data, right? And if you're sharing your data, it may be shared, but it's still your data. So you want to make sure that within the contract there's proper data security and privacy shielding in there, and that it is behind a login. It does, you just don't want it open. And then I know for folks that utilize our data, I always ask for how do you offboard? What are your offboarding processes? Because you could take someone who leaves and still has access to that data. So a lot of this, I think, is tied to contracts, and you want to make sure that your contracts are tight. And anyone that has access to your data, they follow the same security processes as someone would within your logistics company itself. Because again, it's your data, and even though they're using it, you still own the data. So, how do you think freight fraud has changed with a lot of times people say within the last 5 years. I'm going to say within the last year because I think it continues to evolve. How do you think freight fraud's really changed within the last year?
So, being that I've only been in the industry for 2.5 years, this is actually a great question for me because when I first came in, that's what I was told that it's this is just blown up in the last, like you say, 5 years. So, just since I've been in the industry, the way that they're doing it has changed tremendously. Like in 2025, the what we saw, what we were trying to combat, and as an industry, they were selling the MC numbers because everybody in COVID went out and got an MC number because that's where the money was. Legitimately, they wanted to run freight. Well, it's obviously not as lucrative right now in the last couple years. So they're selling their MC numbers, which would be okay if they did it legally through the FMCSA, but they're doing it on like the black market. Like they'll put
Hmm.
it on Facebook or whatnot and sell it with their phone numbers and email addresses. That's what we saw in 2025. We were combating the sale of the MC number. Still exists, but this year it seems to be these same fraudsters that sell the packages of MC numbers by the hundreds. They're sending out the phishing emails. We've gone to completely cyber, even when it's the actual like pickup fraud, it's the physical fraud. It starts as cyber. They send these carriers, the little 5, 10 truck carriers, so they don't have the same security maybe on their email that we
Hmm.
do. And they will send them the phishing emails. They don't even know they clicked on it because nothing bad happens to them. And this gets all their credentials, their logins. So they sell those on the black market. They sell the logins with, hey, they have access to highway or they're accepted at the DAT, wherever their credentials are for. And they interact with brokers now using the proper credentials. And so before, when we used to be able to say, okay, the spoofed email address is what we're looking for, this is real emails now, right? They are
Right.
hacked in, they're working out of the spam box, and we think we're dealing with an actual carrier. So it's very important. We need to, I always say it, we need to go back to the 90s. I know that shows my age, but we need to go back to the 90s where we all use cell phones or even the phones with the little curly things, and we call our carriers, right? We talk to the people, we get to know them, we build a relationship. And that is so much better than doing by email somebody just saying, hey, I want to pick up your freight. And you email them back with, the contract. So really, the only way to combat this, because of the way it's changing, is for us to pick up that phone and make the phone call.
And yeah, I think you bring up a great point. And once you establish that relationship, if anything happens out of the ordinary, again, pick up the phone because you know the carrier, you know their habits, you know their routines, you know how they do business. And so you really want to establish that relationship. And I think there's a generational thing, right? That the the newer the younger generation, that's what they know. They know text. They don't know as much phone calls. I know even, my kids will be in the same room and texting back and forth. I'm like, what do you not speak? So I think that's just, it's like, oh, I don't like talking on the phone. So I think there's a hesitancy for that. And so
I
I think
agree.
it's great advice to, pick up the phone, vet, talk, revet. It's not a one and done. It's something you have to continue to do in order for it to be successful. what, what are a lot of times you see the bad guys, the same groups, the same scheme. Do you see that this year? You see a lot of you mentioned the drivers. Do you see a lot more of that, or and what do you, if you had a crystal ball, what would you envision next year?
So I can't really envision next year, right now, the way it changes. The one thing that doesn't change is that they're all working together. They're using the same drivers. We see that because we have great shippers that do like turn away trucks when they come up and they're not who we sent them.
Hmm.
Um, and we get copies of like IDs or you get their names, when they sign in, right? So legitimate ways of finding out who's driving that truck. And I find that even if you're using a different carrier, these same drivers are showing up over and over again. And I think that shows how big the theft, the strategic theft is, and it's under one umbrella. So we're not fighting individual entities. We're fighting one big entity. And I think law enforcement knows that. We do, I have worked in the past with law enforcement and I know that they understand. They understand what's going on. Of course, they don't share with us exactly what they're doing,
Hmm.
kind of like we don't share exactly what we're doing, right? But yeah, it's definitely under one umbrella. And I mean, I can't predict. I'm not great at that. That's not my forte. But I do believe if we all start working together the way it looks like we're going to be, we can fill those cracks in.
Okay. And I know I was on a call earlier this week. It was with some folks from law enforcement. And they really think they're like, hey, I think there's four or five groups really driving this. And they've spread out and it's all throughout, but it's almost like drug dealing, right? A lot of times you arrest the folks that are uh, executing it, but not planning it. And they're like, if we could just get high enough, we really think we could cut this down. If we get these four or five groups that are really orchestrating most of this throughout North America, including U.S. and Canada. You mentioned clicking on email, and that's where freight fraud combines with good cyber hygiene. Um, and part of the challenge is training the drivers because they're on the move. If the wheels aren't moving, they're not making money. So how do you take how in logistics for any company? How do you train the driver on train a driver on good cyber hygiene to help slow down freight fraud?
Well, and that is the challenge in this industry because there's so many different silos. We do have the broker, and then they have the carrier. So if you have a regular carrier that you use, you can give them any. I mean, there are so many different training modules, right? There's different ways to do the multi-factor. And I know that if you deal with a carrier that has been infiltrated, you can have them do this multi-factor. But I don't really know how, if you're not tied to the carrier, you can get this information to them unless we just put it out there and make it public, put it on go on load boards, and it's not something that I think bad guys, even if they got a hold of it, it would hurt us.
Right.
We're just teaching the carriers in general. But it's hard as a broker to give this to carriers that you haven't already had a relationship with. So again, picking up the phone, having that relationship, you can share the information.
What are some of the recommendations that you would make? We vetted the carrier, but then problems happen at pickup and delivery. What's some of the recommendations that you've got for improved vetting at pickup and delivery, or is it something within the bill of lading? We vet the driver, everything's good there, but something happens. How do we do better at pickup and delivery as far as cybersecurity and freight fraud?
So for if you're vetting throughout, if you start from the point that they start working with you and you vet throughout, you keep the vetting going, not just when they sign on with you, because most
Hmm.
brokers they sign up. You keep vetting them, make sure nothing changes. And when you do hire them, you get the real information. The broker needs to get the driver, the truck number, whatever information that they can legally obtain, and then share that with the shipper. And if they keep doing that, of course, the first few times they're going to have to turn away the truck if the wrong person shows up. But eventually, the bad guy or whoever's double brokering, whatever the situation is that they get returned, they'll learn. They'll learn, okay, this particular broker and this particular shipper, they are doing the right thing. They either have a tech that they use, because there is tech out there that you can do where they verify, or you can, manually do it. Humans could do it too, where you look at the ID. But they'll learn that that lane is not the one that they need to target. So it's really about repetition and making sure that you're doing all the vetting from the time they sign on with you till delivery.
Okay. And you came from oil and gas, and so you jumped from oil and gas to logistics. What are some of the things that you've been able to apply or that you think have been valuable as far as some of the lessons that you learned or some of the things that you learned within oil and gas? Is there any overlap?
Actually, fraud overlaps. I've been in the retail industry in between. I mean, you have to learn the industry because there's different, obviously, they're stealing different things. But the
Hmm.
mindset of the bad guy is the same. So it's kind of like they can steal whatever they want. They could apply the same thing in each industry. So it's just learning their patterns and getting to know, basically getting in the mind of the bad guy, right? Figure out, if I were going to steal this, how would I do it? And it's the same thing no matter what industry you're in.
How much do you see or hear of just the old-fashioned physical, the happen to run upon a truck, steal the load? How much of that do you hear? How much of that do you see? How much of that is happening versus the cyber-enabled freight fraud?
So in 2025, that actually spiked, like in the entire industry, it spiked.
Hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily like it appeared like that was what was happening. But what was really happening, it was still cyber. A good carrier that has 10 trucks, they would hire on somebody that they believed was a good carrier, a good driver. They had no background, but they were really a plant. They would drive the truck and they would park it in whatever area, and they were getting paid by the bad guy to let them steal their truck. So 2025 it did blow up. In 2026 I haven't seen that as much personally.
Okay.
I do know it's still talked about at conferences, so I know it's still out there, but I think that they've figured out this whole hacking thing with the carriers, and I think that's really what they're doing this year.
Okay. I know, as Marley mentioned, I think we've had, over 30 of these calls, and some of the calls are with brokers and carriers and shippers. And, they some of them really get to you because it's like they don't know what to do. They're kind of like, I'm just stuck, and they're emotional because it's like, hey, this is not just one fraud puts me out of business. And we've heard stories about people, what that does to these companies. And so really what we want to do is to give them hope. um, but a lot of people just seem to be waiting on, I'd say a magic wand, maybe from the government, that, oh, okay, they're gonna fix this all, which I'm been saying, yeah, I really don't see that happening. I think we're gonna have to fix this together. Do you see anything on the horizon that other than what we've talked about as far as communication, and anything on the horizon that you've seen that's like, oh, okay, this is the magic wand, this is just gonna fix it?
So there is a magic wand, and that is go to as many conferences as you can, get relationships, because if we like communicate, work together. I'm in a ton of groups where we share information. And again, you don't want to do it in like like this, a public venue.
Mhm.
But if you go to these conferences, you get business cards, you build relationships. Those cracks that you're seeing because you're a smaller, obviously that you're talking about the smaller brokers that have their own businesses, they can have a wider network. So even though they're small, they have the resources of everybody because they can make a phone call. They can go, "Hey, Shannon, I'm going to use this carrier. I don't feel real comfortable with them. What do you think? Like, do you have any experience with them?" Things like that. Just sharing information like that, having that relationship, that is the magic wand.
And I think you bring up a really good point of doing it in person. I know, that's it's a good segue that I won't go all the way into yet, but we do our cyber conference, and last year it's the only cyber conference in the trucking industry, but last year I would say 40% of our agenda was freight fraud. And I was, again, we heard stories, we had a panel, and people talked about, okay, this is how my freight got stolen. But then the question was always, how could I have prevented it? And the answer usually did not come from one person. It was usually a group's challenge that, we didn't sit down and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. But then the group talked about, well, have you done this? Yeah, I've done that. That didn't work. Well, what about this? What about that? And it really got to the point where we were helping solve these problems from an operational perspective. And I know for us, we kick the media out. It's Chatham House rules. So it is something where you're working with your peers to try to solve a problem. One of the questions we received, are there learned experiences from the retail industry that can be explored or implemented in the transportation industry?
So in the retail industry, it's usually a single person that's stealing, right? We did have some delivery, but that again, that's logistic stuff. So that's where the crossover I think really happens is in where when they were supposed to deliver to us, there were shortages. I'm sure everyone on here has had that where you're, on the logistics side, you dealing with the shortages, but from the retail side, it's the same thing. You have the shortages, the driver decided they were going to take a couple pallets out. So it's really the opposite side. So the learnings, there's really not a lot of crossover in learnings besides the prevention portion of, again, and what we preached in retail was you have to physically check in your freight, right? Otherwise, we can't report it to the freight people that it's short. So it's again, human touch. That's exactly what we taught is human touch. So I guess the crossover is the human touch part. Everybody has their tech. Tech is everywhere, but the human touch is really the thing that crosses over.
Okay. And shortages, we were speaking to someone and they were saying that there's a company that what the driver would do is he would deliver alcohol and a pallet of booze would get dropped off, end up and they give it was a liquor store. And they buy it cash only. And that happened for months and months and months until finally somebody's like, wait a minute. And they would actually go in and edit the bill of lading. So it's
Mm.
like, okay, you've got to, so it's like, how do what's an operational process to help solve that? And of course, it's look at the bill of lading as it leaves, as it, there's just a lot of operational pieces there. If you could give one piece of advice to everybody that's listening, what is one piece of advice you wish everybody listening would start to do differently?
Work together. I was going to say layering. That was initially when you started talking. When you start talking, I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk about layering. But I think everybody knows that. They know, you have to have more than one thing. I mean, we do that at our homes. We have security at home and, we do that. But I think the hardest thing for human nature is to trust and to ask for help. Nobody likes to ask for help. But if we work together, we can combat them. But the theft, because you asked me earlier, like how does it change from 2025 to 2026 and in the prior years? But what doesn't change is that those four entities that you talked to law enforcement about, they may be four separate entities, but I personally have seen where the two cross over. One will actually help the other one out. So they're separate entities, or they're whatever they want to call themselves, mobs, bad guys, whatever. And they still collaborate when needed. If it's something that crosses their boundaries of, I'm sure they all have their special boundaries so they don't cross into each other's territories, but they're working together. So
Hmm.
if I could say one thing, it's everyone needs to work together and get over the fear of feeling helpless.
Right. Okay. Well, appreciate it. So what we're going to do is kind of shift gears a little bit. And Marley, did you want to go spend a few minutes going through let's spend a few minutes going through the threat report portal.
Yep, you got it. I'm going to bring over the screen real quick. Everyone should be able to see it. And yes, so this here is a new offering that is not yet live to the general public as of yet, but it will be in June. So everyone on the call is really receiving a sneak peek of this. And you can see just a general awareness page here of what the actual threat report portal is. So it is the sharing of threat intelligence information. So we will request of you just to report cyber events, incidents, cargo crimes, etc., through this portal. And with that, I'll scroll down and you can see what you can report. So cyber events, that's one, and or cargo crimes is the second. Joe, would you like to take a deeper dive into these?
Yeah, and the reason we did this is I mentioned that when somebody stood up and said, "Hey, this just happened," what we want to prevent is someone going a bad actor going from one place to the next place to the next place. And we had so many lessons learned in our conference, even from a cyber perspective. There was a recent cyber event where they would get in through spamming someone's email, then say, "Hey, I'm IT. I see you got 1,000 emails. Let me help you with that." Well, it really wasn't IT. It was a bad actor getting into Teams that could then get keys to the kingdom. And so, one of the things we were like, okay, when this happens, people pick up the phone and they call 100 of their peers or 50 of their peers, but they don't really have time. And by the time they do, it could be too late. So we wanted something where you can anonymously report, hey, this cyber event happened. Maybe you stopped it. And then this gives us an opportunity then to just give that message out. Hey, here's a recent thing that we're seeing. There's a lot of really good feeds that you could get through the different companies, but the problem is that they're not specific to the industry. And we wanted one specific to the industry. And then from a freight fraud perspective, it's the same thing. It's an opportunity to share anonymously, not not the details of, how you're preventing it necessarily, but that it's occurring. Then you could present it to your company, your operations team, and say, okay, how can we prevent this? This is something that's happening right now. And then what NMFTA will do is they'll start looking at the data and it will be part of the guidelines that they put together just as recommended best practices. And then also it helps us when we're talking to, industry leaders within the government saying, hey, here's a gap. How can we close this gap? Because at the end of the day, the answer is in the data, right? How do you stop the next one? You're going to find that answer from the past because, although it may change a little bit, if you plug all these holes, we really should be able to stop it. And so this is a way for the industry to communicate.
Would you like me to go into the form?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, sure. So we can do report event first. So again, just submit some details about the actual event that has taken place. And again, your identity will not be attached to this report. Although we do request information here, name and company, again, it will not be affiliated with said report. Joe, if you'd like to expand on some of the details here and the reasoning for them.
Yeah, the reason we ask the questions that we do is just so that we can properly communicate. We're not law enforcement. We're not going to report this to law enforcement. That's up to the whoever's submitting it. But really, these are the pieces of information we feel are most valuable to help prevent the next event. And to make sure people are aware that this is happening because we never know what they may do if they were stopped or what they may do. I think we've all heard of the recent breach within Canvas, and how that's impacting people. And that one was fast and it got a ton of data. They got terabytes of data. So, if someone is stopping someone before they even get a gig of data, we want to put that out there. And same for freight fraud. We heard about an issue with tires. And it's like, okay, we want to get that out there. So these fields are just the ones that we feel necessary to be able to do really good communication. Okay,
Okay.
Marley?
Yep. And then just submit report. And there's a similar one for the cargo crime as well. But due to sake of time, we are at an hour 46. So I did want to shift gears, and I'm up next to talk about the Freight Fraud Prevention Hub. So as shared, Joe and I have conducted, like I said, about 32 15-minute introductory calls where we just basically get to know potential partners, better understand their needs, why they came to us, why they're looking to be a part of this. So as you'll see, this is the overarching homepage. And with that, you will see the partner logos to date, 15 of them, scrolling across the bottom here. And we felt that it was very important to put these organizations on display, given that they're leading this kind of task force, right? So we are very pleasantly overwhelmed with the amount of folks that have stepped up and came on board. We do have dozens more in the hopper that we are currently engaging with, scheduling calls with. So we do not see this slowing down. We joked as a staff we might have to put 2 and 3 stacked sets of logos here, depending on how quickly we continue to expand this. But you will see here that the NMFTA logo is actually here amongst the others because we look at this more as an industry-wide initiative, not so much as an NMFTA initiative. So although we are, this is a give back to the industry to become a partner is at no cost. We felt that, it really is just the freight fraud prevention hub. So with that, you can see the mission of the hub if you scroll down through the home page, which is this freightfraudhub.com. You can see some startling stats from our friends here at Atri and Verisk CargoNet. Also, as you scroll down through, you will see freight fraud basics. So NMFTA has primarily, we've always been kind of an LTL industry standard organization, but we are, expanding out. We're a little bit more than that, but classification is our core. So the NMFC, the large book that's on the docks, and then also Class IT Plus, the book's digital counterpart, that's us. So with that, there can be types of freight fraud, obviously, that's happening that deals with classification, digitalization. So we do have the DSDC that's under the NMFTA umbrella, which is basically comprised of the Digital LTL Council and now the Full Truckload Council. So there was a need in the industry on the truckload side, and we stepped up to assist with that. So knowing, again, those digital, the bill of lading that got switched earlier, with the alcohol pallet that Joe was talking about, the goal is to mitigate that with digital e-bowls, et cetera. So as you go down through types of cargo theft, obviously that's been ranking very high on our pages in our analytics. But also you'll see our partner program, how you can get involved, learn more, resources. Obviously, we have a lot. As our cybersecurity team, they help to make frameworks, guidebooks, etc., some vendor checklists. And that's actually a pretty good segue into the resources tab. So with this, you'll see we've got blogs, videos, best practices, podcasts. With Landstar obviously on board, the goal is to cross promote and share information and studies and whatever that our partners can provide, right? So I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive, but you can see here some of the resources. So the framework I briefly discussed, the vendor risk assessment one, as well as these two are actually from Renaissance, which is a partner, as well as Chris Jolly of the Freight Coach. So the 3PL broker community, he's definitely very close with them. But you can see that they thought enough of us and our partnership to then kind of bequeath this information to us. So it is behind a paywall. It is a lead magnet, so we do collect information for those two offerings. So as Shannon shared earlier, you don't want to give the keys to the bad guys, so there is going to be some sort of buffer to protect the information that we are sharing with the general public. One quick thing also I wanted to note is under fraud basics, those common types of cargo theft. You might seem to think, some of these are a little elementary, a little basic, but we really do want to meet everyone where they are. Joe and I have calls with owner operators, marketing coordinators. I mean, we really have just a plethora of folks that we talk to about this portal. And so it's just really important that everyone can get in and find the information that they need and understand it. And lastly, just because we have talked so much about the partner program, I do want to draw attention to our partner page. So those on the call, if you are interested in joining up with us, we do have a dedicated space here where we have broken it down by the different types of partners. Obviously, first up, Landstar. And you can see some other folks like Old Dominion. And then as we go through 3PL partners, et cetera. As of recent, Geotab, Genlogs has come on board. So wanted to pay some specific attention to those folks as well. I think that's all for me on the freight fraud overview. Joe or
Okay.
Shannon, anything to add?
No, I appreciate it. And like we said, the on my side, it's been overwhelming, which is a very positive thing. And when some of the tech providers start joining, that's very encouraging to me because they are taking this seriously, and wanting to help find solutions.
For sure. And here is just another slide of those partners kind of all in one place. So we are very grateful to these organizations for stepping up. And next will be SCAC verified and ID verification. So Joe, I will let you maybe talk to this and then I can follow up with a few slides at the end.
Okay. One of the things that we were tackling at NMFTA was, when we verified a Class A driver for SCAC, there's a lot of information we could utilize. Whether it came from Safer, the FMCSA data, we could utilize that as part of the verification. But a lot of the theft that we were seeing, also some of the things like drug traffic, human trafficking was happening not class 8. And so we looked at, okay, how do we verify non-class 8 if they don't have an MC, if they don't have a DOT number for SCAC? And we found some opportunities to really help the industry plug a hole. And how we're plugging that hole is we're saying, okay, if you're the company owner, and this is your company, and it's non-class 8, you need to verify. So you need to verify your ID. You got to hold it up with your face. It's got to do some comparison. In a lot of cases, it compares it to the records, DMV records, and some other records. And this was obviously something that it wasn't to increase business, because what we've seen is people start to go through the process and then actually stop, which lets me know, hey, this is a good thing. But what we've done with SCAC is we've tried to utilize it for non-class 8 to help tackle the problem of freight fraud. Now we look at addresses. We don't allow PO boxes, and we verify that address is not, some warehouse, empty warehouse or storage facility. It's an actual address. So that also adds a layer of accountability if something were to happen. Um, and we know things like this does happen. That we will get sometimes calls from FBI, from Homeland saying, "What do you know?" about this person who got a SCAC. This helps us be able to defend against that. And one of the things we're really looking at is expanding this as into Class 8 also to help combat freight fraud. Marley, I'll hand it back to you.
Yep, sounds good. So this is just a brief slide, just how to get involved again. There is freightfraudhub.com. If you haven't had a chance yet to visit the site and peruse the blogs and resources, etc. And again, partner program, if you go to that homepage, just all the way over to the right, there is a section there with more information about becoming a partner. Again, there is no cost to be a partner. Are there any other questions I might have floated through, Joe?
Let me look. No, looks like we're good.
All right. So the next webinar, we will be diving into all things freight fraud once more, continuing the conversation. And instead of having Shannon, we will have another partner join us. So make sure that you mark your calendars for that Thursday, September 17th date. You can find that at nmfta.org. And then lastly, I know that Joe, you had shared earlier about the cybersecurity conference. So if you would like to make another plug for that, I do have a slide here.
Yeah, it is September 29th to October 2nd in Long Beach. And again, what it is it's not like 1,000 people. We keep it pretty small, typically about 150 people, and it's open discussions. It's something where we talk about cyber-enabled cargo theft, and we really try to do solutions. So you'll start to see the agenda come out for this. Um, but again, it's a what we want to do is create a safe place for people to talk and share experiences. So you'll see fireside chats, tabletop exercises, and then there's a focus on assets and asset security. So part of our cyber conference will also be securing the things on wheels, because I joke around, but it's true. The truck is an office on wheels. It's got a ton of wireless, a ton of connection points. So we have to look at, how do we secure those assets? So, this is probably for us a highlight, or the highlight that we do every year is the conference. We walk away from it as learning as much as I think the folks in the audience do. A lot of the details, you won't see shared because some of the sessions are not media open to the media, but we'll also do tabletop exercises. The goal is to walk away with that from that conference with not only ideas, but things that you can implement right away. And then also, a lot of the C-level folks that are in there, again, we're trying to solve problems for each other. So this is definitely a highlight. So if you haven't been, I definitely recommend looking at the agenda, talking to some of the folks that have been there in the past. It's a wonderful event.
And Shannon will be there.
I will.
Well,
Awesome. That's all.
okay. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for your time and your insight. We really appreciate it. It's amazing the crossover in the industry. And it's also, I think, wonderful that logistics companies are taking this so seriously. They're looking at your role and embedding it within their company. I think it just shows how important this is. So we really appreciate your time.
And thank you for having me.
Yep. And Marley, thanks as always. And thanks for all your help on the Freight Fraud Prevention Hub. It's been overwhelming, and really appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to talking to everybody in mid-September and hopefully seeing folks at the cyber conference. Thanks again.